Most people didn't notice him. Just an old man standing quietly at the entrance of the diner, one hand resting gently on the back of his golden retriever. But that morning, everything changed. "Sir," the hostess said, arms crossed, "you can't bring that animal in here." The air went still. A few people glanced over their coffee cups, then went back to scrolling their phones. The man didn't argue. He simply looked down at his dog, greying around the muzzle, wearing a blue service vest, and gave a small nod, like he'd expected this. "I understand," he said softly. "We'll eat somewhere else." He turned to leave. No shouting, no scene, just a quiet retreat. But Hannah saw it. She saw all of it. She was wiping down the counter near the window, just another face behind an apron. But something about the way he walked away, stiff, like he was pushing through pain, it stayed with her. And the look in his eyes, that wasn't just disappointment. That was something deeper, like shame that didn't belong to him. No one offered him a seat, no one offered him a cup of coffee, not even a smile. And the dog, it glanced back once before following its owner through the door, tail low, as if it knew this wasn't the first time they'd been turned away. That was the moment, the one that stuck. Hannah didn't say anything right then. She couldn't. Not in front of her manager, not with rules taped to the front door that read, "No pets allowed, strictly enforced." But later that night, after the shift ended and the kitchen lights went dark, Hannah pulled out her phone. She didn't post a video, she didn't start a hashtag. She just wrote a message to someone she hoped still cared about what was right. And that small action, it would change everything. Hannah didn't plan to send anything. She was just venting, typing into her phone like a diary she'd probably delete later. But the words kept coming. "Today at our diner, we turned away an elderly man. He had a service dog. He didn't yell, he didn't complain, he just walked away like he was used to it, and we let him." She stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over send. Then she remembered her uncle, also a vet, who once told her, "Sometimes silence hurts worse than bullets," so she sent it. Not to the internet, not to some comment section, but to an old contact listed in her phone under Mara Regional Guest Relations. They met once at a company event. Hannah wasn't even sure the number still worked. But 3 minutes later, typing appeared. Then, "Can you tell me what happened in detail right now?" Hannah froze. She'd just kicked a hornet's nest, a corporate one. She typed it all. How the man said his dog helped with nightmares. How the manager barely looked him in the eye. How the whole room just sat there pretending not to see. And then she added something she hadn't meant to confess. "I wanted to stop it, I just didn't." Mara didn't reply right away. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally her phone buzzed. "Thank you, stay quiet for now, I'm coming." Across town, under a flickering streetlight, the man they'd turned away was sitting on a bench outside a closed pharmacy. He wasn't waiting for anything, just resting. His dog curled up beside his worn boots, its head on his knee. Inside his coat pocket was a crumpled receipt. The only thing he'd bought all day, a bottle of aspirin, and a blueberry muffin from a gas station that didn't ask questions. He didn't want pity, he wanted dignity, but today even that felt like too much to ask. Tomorrow, the town would remember his name. But tonight, he was just another man in the shadows, waiting for something to change. By morning, the message had reached more than just Mara. It had reached the desk of someone who hadn't forgotten what real service looked like. Captain Michael Reed, retired Air Force, now Director of Veteran Affairs for the region, read the forwarded email with a sinking heart. He'd seen too many stories like it lately. Quiet heroes, slipping through the cracks of a country they once protected. He picked up the phone. "Get me the diner's security footage," he said. "I want to see his face." Meanwhile, Hannah was back behind the counter. No one had said a word about what happened the day before. Not her manager, not the other staff. It was like it hadn't happened at all. Until the bell above the door chimed. Amara walked in. In a sharp navy coat and boots that meant business, she stepped right up to the counter. Hannah felt her stomach drop. But Mara didn't scold her. She just leaned in and said, "Do you know his name?" Hannah blinked. "No, he never told me." Mara nodded, turned and left. That same afternoon, a man at the local VA office identified him from a blurry still image. His name was Walter Green, age 81, Marine Corps, 2 tours in Vietnam. Awarded the Silver Star, though he never talked about it. He lived alone in a modest apartment on the edge of town. His only companion, a golden retriever named Bailey, trained to detect anxiety attacks brought on by combat flashbacks. When asked about what happened at the diner, Walter just shook his head. "It's not the first time," he said quietly. "Won't be the last." But this time someone was watching, and someone was done being silent. That evening Mara met with Captain Reed in a quiet room at City Hall. No press, no fanfare. They agreed on one thing: Walter Green would not go unseen again. And as they spoke, across town, Hannah sat on the back steps of the diner, holding a small brown paper bag. Inside it, a fresh muffin. Not from guilt, not from pity, but because she knew tomorrow she was going to find Walter. And finally say what she hadn't the day before. She didn't know where to start looking. All she had was a name, Walter Green, and the memory of where he sat, the weathered wooden bench outside the 24-hour pharmacy under that old flickering street lamp. So that's where Hannah went. She got off her shift early, slipped the muffin into a small paper bag, and walked down Main Street with nervous steps and a hopeful heart. The bench was empty, but there was a folded newspaper on it, and a few grey hairs scattered across the worn planks. He had been there. She sighed, sat down for a moment, unsure what she was even doing. Maybe it was too late. Maybe he didn't want to be found. Then she heard it, the soft chuff of a dog's breath. And a familiar golden retriever came padding around the corner, tail swaying low and slow, like it remembered her. Walter followed behind, moving carefully with a slight limp, wearing that same old green military coat, his ball cap pulled low. He stopped when he saw her. "You again," he said, surprised but not unkind. I brought something," Hannah said, standing quickly. She held out the bag like it weighed more than it should. Bailey sniffed the air and sat politely, eyes fixed on the treat. Walter raised an eyebrow. "Blueberry?" Hannah smiled. "Warm this time." He chuckled, just once, then sat beside her with a quiet grunt. They sat for a moment without speaking, watching the traffic crawl past like it had nowhere to be. "I'm sorry," Hannah said softly, "for what happened, for not doing more." Walter shook his head. "You did enough, you saw me," he paused. "Some days that's everything." She blinked back tears. No one had ever made her feel more seen while she was apologising. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A ribbon, frayed at the edges, folded like it had lived in there for years. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. She nodded. "Silver Star?" Walter gave a small nod. "They gave it to me for pulling 2 men out of a burning convoy. Funny thing is, the third guy didn't make it. I think about him more than the medal." Hannah looked at him, really looked, and realised something. This wasn't just a man who had been forgotten. He was still carrying the weight of the people he'd saved, and the ones he couldn't. She didn't know what to say, but that was okay, because sometimes silence is what respect sounds like. Hannah hadn't told anyone about meeting Walter again. Not her co-workers, not her manager, definitely not Mara. But that night, she posted something small on her personal page. Just a photo, the bench, the muffin bag in Walter's lap, and Bailey, nose resting gently on Walter's knee, eyes half closed in trust. No names, no location, just 5 words typed beneath the image. "We can do better than this." She turned her phone off after posting. She didn't expect anything. But the next morning, everything changed. By 9 a.m, the photo had been shared over 5,000 times. By noon, a local news reporter was calling the diner asking for comment. By 2 p.m, Mara texted one sentence. "You need to come outside now." Hannah stepped out the back door of the diner and froze. A news van was parked across the street. A group of veterans in uniform stood quietly on the sidewalk, facing the entrance of the diner like they were guarding something sacred. In front of them, Walter Green, hat on, back straight, Bailey at his heel. He wasn't here for a fight. He was here to remind the world that he existed. Inside the diner, Denise, the manager who had refused Walter just days ago, was frantically whispering into her headset, pacing back and forth like the sky had suddenly cracked open. "We're not prepared for this kind of attention," she hissed to someone. But outside, a different kind of order was forming. One by one, people began leaving cups of coffee and warm muffins on the bench by the sidewalk. A small, handwritten sign had appeared. For anyone who's ever felt invisible. That afternoon, Mara arrived with Captain Reed. They didn't ask permission. They walked straight through the diner into the main dining area, where a few confused guests sat watching everything unfold. And then Captain Reed, in full dress uniform, stood tall and said aloud, "This man deserves better. This country deserves better. And thanks to the courage of a young woman who refused to stay silent, we're going to make it right." Gasps, whispers, silence. Outside, more cars began pulling up. More veterans stepped out, many older, some with canes, some with dogs. They weren't here for spectacle. They were here for Walter. And the bench by the pharmacy would no longer be the only place that remembered him. The footage had gone viral. Not the photo. No, that was just the beginning. Someone from inside the diner had leaked the security footage. The clip was grainy, but the audio was clear. It captured everything. Walter entering quietly, asking softly if he could sit. Denise refusing, loud, firm, absolute. And Hannah, stepping in with a single line. He's not asking for much, just a moment of peace. Then came the silence, that long, cold pause before Walter turned, thanked no one, and left with Bailey at his side. By sunset, the video had reached nearly 2 million views. But something unexpected happened next. A man named Joel McCarthy was watching from his apartment in San Diego. He paused the video, leaned closer to the screen, and then whispered, "Walter?" He hadn't seen him in nearly 30 years. Back in '92, Walter Green had been his platoon sergeant. Joel had been 21, lost, angry, ready to quit everything. But Walter? Walter had pulled him aside one night and said, "You have a future, McCarthy. Don't waste it." Joel had never forgotten that. So he picked up the phone and made a call. The next day, a private charter bus pulled into the town's quiet main street. Inside it were 10 men, all Marines, all retired. And every single one had once served under Walter Green. At the front of the line was Joel. He walked into the diner that morning, not as a customer, but as a man on a mission. He didn't shout, he didn't argue. He simply placed a framed photo of his old platoon on the counter and said to the stunned staff, "That man you turned away saved every one of us." He nodded toward the group of Marines waiting outside in perfect silence. Then he looked directly at Denise. "And now we're stand-in for him." Across town, Walter sat on his porch, unaware of the storm brewing in his honour. He was sipping weak coffee, rubbing Bailey's ears, and staring out at the mailbox like it might deliver peace if he waited long enough. Then Hannah pulled up in her car. She stepped out holding a bag, not muffins this time. Inside was a folded shirt. On the back, "We stand with Walter." Walter chuckled softly. "What's this now?" She grinned. "It's not just a shirt, it's the beginning of something." He tilted his head, amused. "Beginning of what?" Her smile softened. "Of people finally seeing you." By the next morning, Main Street was unrecognisable. A quiet town that usually moved slow, half awake by 7 o'clock, now buzzed with energy before sunrise. Cars lined the street, flags hung from windows. Reporters stood on corners with cameras already rolling. But it wasn't chaos, it was reverence, because word had spread. Not just about Walter Green, but about what he represented. And outside the Mason diner, where Walter had once been turned away, a line of people now wrapped around the block. Not for pancakes, but for purpose. The owners tried to open the door at 7 o'clock sharp. They couldn't, because standing silently at the front of the line was a boy, maybe 12, holding a cardboard sign that read, "My grandpa said Walter saved him." Behind him, a woman in scrubs. Then a retired police officer, a mother holding a toddler, a biker in a leather vest with service pins. Each person had a story. Each one had been touched by someone like Walter, and none of them were leaving. Inside, Denise, the manager who had caused it all, stood frozen behind the counter. She looked out through the window, past the American flags, past the row of news vans, and whispered to no one in particular, "I didn't mean for this to happen." But it had, because kindness can echo louder than cruelty. And this time, the world was listening. At 8:15, a single black SUV pulled into the alley behind the diner. Hannah stepped out first, then Walter. He wasn't wearing anything special, just his old green jacket and a cap that had seen too many storms. But to the crowd waiting, he looked like royalty. As he turned the corner and walked toward the diner, something happened. The entire crowd began to applaud. Not cheer, not shout, just applaud. A slow rising wave of claps that filled the street like a heartbeat, steady and full of love. Walter paused, eyes glassy behind his thick frames. He hadn't expected this. He had simply come because Hannah had asked. And now they were standing for him. A man stepped out of the crowd and saluted, then another and another. Old men, young women, strangers from other towns, former soldiers who hadn't worn their uniforms in years. Each one raising their hand, palm stiff, eyes locked on the man who had once believed the world had forgotten him. Walter looked to Hannah. "Are they all here for me?" She nodded. "They're here because you reminded them who they are." Inside the diner, time felt like it was holding its breath. Denise stood by the counter, her clipboard clutched tight, knuckles white. The place she used to run with authority, where every creak of a chair and flicker of a light bulb answered to her, now felt like someone else's stage. The The room was packed, not with customers, with witnesses, veterans, neighbours, strangers who had driven in from towns an hour away, all there for one reason. And they were quiet, not a whisper, not a cough, just the sound of footsteps as Walter entered. And standing behind him, Captain Reynolds, decorated, respected, and unmistakable in his pressed navy uniform. He had come not as a tourist, not as a customer, but as a statement. Denise took a step forward, ready to explain, to apologise, to backtrack. But the captain raised a hand. "Miss," he said firmly, "I'm not here for a debate. I'm here to correct something wrong." Then he turned toward Walter. "Sir, I owe you more than a meal. I owe you my presence." He stepped forward, removed his hat, and offered a slow, reverent salute. The diner held its breath. Walter, stunned, saluted back, but shakily, not from fear, from years of memories colliding in his chest. Captain Reynolds turned to the crowd. This man did not ask to be honoured. He didn't ask for applause or headlines. He asked for respect. And yesterday this place denied him that. So today I came to give it back. He reached into his coat and pulled out something unexpected. A wooden plaque, hand-carved, simple. It read, "Reserved in perpetuity, Walter Green, Seat of Honour." The crowd erupted in soft applause. Walter stared at the plaque as if he couldn't believe it was real. "For me?" The captain nodded. "You showed more courage sitting outside in silence than most of us do standing in a room full of power." Denise stepped back, her eyes glassy, no longer holding the clipboard like a shield. Something shifted. Because this wasn't a takedown, it wasn't revenge. It was clarity. She walked over slowly and looked at Walter. "I was wrong," she said, voice trembling. "I saw rules. I didn't see you." Walter didn't scold her, didn't gloat, didn't say a word. He just nodded. Because sometimes forgiveness is quieter than punishment. And sometimes grace makes a bigger impact than blame. Captain Reynolds placed the plaque on the booth by the window, Walter's booth now. "This seat belongs to him," he said. "Not because of what he's done, but because of what he's endured." Outside the line was still growing, but something inside the town had already changed. And it all started with a muffin, and a girl named Hannah, who simply noticed. It started with a single photo, taken on an old iPhone by someone in the back of the diner. Just a snapshot. Walter standing next to his plaque, his hand resting gently on the table, Hannah by his side, and Captain Reynolds still saluting in the background. But that image told a story louder than any headline ever could. By nightfall, it had already been shared thousands of times. By morning, millions. News anchors couldn't stop talking about it. Veteran reclaimed seat of dignity. From humiliation to honour, one town's apology. A plaque, a muffin, and a moment that moved the nation. Cable channels ran the footage on loop. Veterans from every branch commented online, sharing their own stories of being overlooked, unheard, unacknowledged. And in those stories, their Walter became a symbol, not of anger, but of quiet strength, of second chances, of the idea that dignity isn't a reward, it's a right. A week later, Walter received a letter in the mail. The return address was Washington, D.C. It wasn't typed, it wasn't stamped by some office assistant. It was handwritten, signed by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. "Dear Mr. Green," it began, "your story reminded us what honour looks like in everyday moments. It shouldn't take headlines or heroes in uniform for someone like you to be seen. But when it does, we listen." It ended with an invitation to speak at the National Veterans Summit in Washington. Not as a war hero, but as a human reminder. Walter didn't say yes right away. He wasn't used to microphones, or suits, or standing in front of strangers. But Hannah looked at him and said, "You don't have to say anything special, just be who you are, that's more than enough." So the man who had once been ignored at a corner booth found himself standing behind a podium, his cane leaning against the side, his old marine cap tucked under one arm. He cleared his throat and began softly. "I'm not here because I wanted attention. I'm here because one young woman gave me something I didn't expect. Dignity. And when you give someone dignity, it multiplies. It doesn't stop with one seat or one day. It grows, it spreads, and it reminds people that we all matter, even when the world forgets." The room stood in silence, not from shock but from understanding. And then they rose, one by one. Veterans, politicians, activists, journalists, all on their feet, applauding. Because Walter didn't deliver a speech. He delivered truth, weeks past. Walter Green's story had gone from a quiet ripple in a small-town diner to a wave felt across the country. But he didn't change. Every Sunday morning, he still showed up at the diner. Same booth by the window, same cup of black coffee, same old dog curled at his feet, tail thumping quietly on the floor. But something had changed. That seat across from him, it was never empty again. Some days it was a kid in ROTC who just wanted to listen. Other days it was a widow who had lost her husband in Desert Storm and didn't know how to talk about it until Walter simply sat in silence with her. Once, it was a nervous high school student doing a school project on ordinary heroes. Walter chuckled and said, "Kid, you're looking in the wrong place." The boy just shook his head and hit record. Hannah? She was still there every weekend, still baking, still smiling. But now something more. After the speech in DC, the diner started receiving letters. From veterans groups, from schools, even from a military base 2 towns over. They wanted to bring people there, not for food, but for what the place meant. So Hannah started a program, Coffee with Honour. Every Saturday morning, free coffee and breakfast for any veteran who walked through the door. No questions, no IDs, just respect. The plaque on the booth, it had a new addition now. Beneath Walter's name, someone had added, "Where stories are heard, not silenced." Then one morning, as spring began to warm the windows, a little girl came in with her mother. She walked right up to Walter, holding a crayon drawing. "You're the soldier who made my grandpa smile again," she said. Walter's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. It was him, sitting at the booth, dog at his feet, sunlight through the glass, and the words written in a child's blocky handwriting. "Kindness wins." Walter looked up at Hannah, then out the window, then down at the drawing. He didn't say much. He didn't need to, because that booth had become more than a seat. It had become a reminder that sometimes the loudest acts of courage come wrapped in silence, that sometimes justice doesn't come in noise, but in quiet recognition, and that sometimes one small kindness can move an entire country. And to this day, if you walk into that little diner, you'll see the plaque. You'll hear laughter, quiet stories, and the soft scrape of boots under tables. And if you're lucky, you might even catch a glimpse of an old man in a cap, nodding to the past, while making room for the future. Because heroes don't always wear medals. Sometimes they wear muffins and aprons. And they always leave the seat open for the next story to be told. Sometimes it's the smallest moments that stay with us the longest. A seat on a plane, a muffin in a cafe, a quiet man no one noticed, until someone finally did. To me, this story isn't just about justice, it's about how we all have the power to make someone feel seen, not by doing something grand, but by choosing kindness, even when it costs us. So if this video moved you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed a moment like this? Or maybe lived through one? Share it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe the world needs more of these stories, more reminders of our shared humanity, please hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment. It helps more than you know. Out of the thousands of videos you could have watched today, you chose this one. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. Take care, be kind, and I'll see you in the next story. Much love, bye for now.